Last week, just days after President Orban rolled out the red carpet in Budapest for President Xi, the Chinese dictator rolled out a red carpet in Beijing for Vladimir Putin. The friendship without limits struck between America's greatest strategic adversaries will now endure, quote, for generations to come, end quote. And it appears to be rooted in a shared myth about the nature of world conflicts and a victim complex that would be laughable if it didn't carry such grave consequences for Western peace and security. At last week's summit, Russia and China together accused the United States of threatening the world's strategic balance, as if it's Washington rather than Beijing or Moscow trying to redraw borders by force or to disrupt global order. Well, if you're looking for the government that has doubled its nuclear arsenal in 3 years, you'll find it in Beijing, not Washington. In fact, America's own strategic deterrent continues to suffer from chronic neglect. And the Biden administration continues to submit defense budgets that fail to keep up with inflation, much less with the growing threat posed by the PRC. And if you're looking for the regime recklessly developing an insanely provocative and destabilizing nuclear weapon to deploy in space, you'll find that one in Moscow. The world's leading authoritarians never seem to let the facts get in the way, but economic and military realities matter enormously to the future of fledgling democracies and developing nations who are vulnerable to their economic coercion, and thuggish political intimidation. The challenge to Western peace and security is not confined to the Taiwan Straits and the trenches of Ukraine. Chinese debt traps and Russian security forces are expanding malign influence from Central America, Central Asia to Africa, and to our own Western Hemisphere. Russia's efforts to strangle democracy and wrestle free societies back under its control were perhaps most glaring along the borders of Europe. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, the unshackled nations have largely chosen freedom and worked to build democratic governments and societies oriented squarely to the West. And the neo-Soviet imperialists in the Kremlin see that as a threat. Leaders in Washington are prone to forget how fragile our own experiment in democracy was during the earliest days, and how precious are the safeguards our founders enshrined in our government to protect the minority from the excess of authoritarianism of majority rule. Sometimes, of course, politicians in Washington even flirt with the idea of tearing down these safeguards of democracy to deny the minority any meaningful power. Fortunately, there's still a bipartisan firewall in the Senate against this sort of short-sighted radicalism. But for nascent, vulnerable democracies, such safeguards face even graver threats. And in Georgia, a parliamentary majority quest for power is threatening to suffocate the nation's civil society and unravel the guardrails of its democracy. In an attempt to consolidate its hold on government, the Georgian Dream Party would stamp out the Euro-Atlantic aspirations of the Georgian people. And while the political opposition is large, it is chronically divided against itself. Despite their feckless party leaders, thousands of Georgians have taken to the streets to protest. Their desire for self-determination and freedom from Russian coercion is obvious. 4 in 5 Georgians tell pollsters they want a distinctly European future. They believe that planting themselves firmly in the West, among democratic nations where the rule of law prevails, is in their best interest. Whether Georgia looks east or west matters to the United States. Standing with free people resisting the aggression of tyrants like Putin or Xi is in our own interest. This is true of Taiwan and Ukraine, Estonia, and Japan. And it's true of Georgia. The Georgian people deserve to write their own future, not have it dictated to them by Moscow's preferred party chiefs. And why is it that Russians obsess over controlling Georgia's future? Oh, it's about more than acting out Putin's neo-imperialist fantasy. Geography matters. For millennia, Georgia and its Black Sea coast have stood at the crossroads of the civilized world. It's a key transit point for critical resources. And today, along with Armenia, it sits as a tantalizing link in the land bridge between authoritarian partners in Moscow and Tehran. The people of Georgia have a long history of enduring conflict and conquest. They have a long tradition of resilience and a rich culture to be proud of. And they know there's a difference between bending to Russia and turning to the West. So, like friends of the Georgian people across the West, I'm hopeful this moment will be one which they can take yet more pride. As a moment when the opposition to Russian coercion puts petty differences aside and stands united. Of course, this must also be a moment for Georgia's ruling party to recognize the cost of ignoring their people's will in order to fulfill Putin's whims and to stop short of shredding their relationship with the West. I hope those in power in Tbilisi will put sovereignty over subjugation and withdraw the coercive Russia law from Parliament. On another matter, last Thursday, the Biden administration announced its plan to sacrifice yet another source of affordable, reliable American energy on the altar of climate activism. After years of freezes and bans on onshore and offshore oil and gas leasing, the administration's latest attempt to appease Democrats' radical base is a ban on new coal leasing in Powder River Basin of Wyoming and Montana. This region is responsible for producing nearly half of the nation's coal. Last year alone, the basin created more than 250 million tons of coal and employs more than 4,000 people. Shutting off development will result in lost jobs and millions of dollars of lost revenue for Montana and Wyoming. The sting of the administration's war on coal is one Kentuckians know all too well, and working families across the country are already struggling with persistent inflation. Energy prices alone have risen more than 40% since President Biden took office. But Washington Democrats' radicalism may have finally stretched their own party to the breaking point. In fact, the Biden administration's war on affordable, reliable American energy has proven so radically harmful to consumers, workers, and our global competitiveness that it's facing bipartisan opposition right here in the Senate. Just yesterday, a bipartisan majority passed Senator Cruz's resolution disapproving of the Department of Energy's new rule to effectively ban affordable natural gas home furnaces. This rule would signify increase the existing efficiency standard and effectively ban the sale of more affordable home heating furnaces that don't need it. By one estimate, this rule will heap as much as $4 billion in new costs onto consumers who already can't afford the high cost of the Biden economy. The American people have suffered enough, from Bidenomics to the Green New Deal. I'm glad a majority of the Senate agrees it's time to slam the brakes on the administration's assault on gas appliances. And I'm thankful to my colleague, Senator Cruz, for bringing attention to this madness.